In the past few decades, several national parks across the United States have recorded cases of park rangers disappearing under mysterious and unexplained circumstances. Not tourists, not inexperienced hikers, but trained professionals who understood the wilderness better than anyone else. These were individuals who underwent daily physical training, who could read tracks, shadows, and terrain like a language, who knew how weather behaves in remote regions, and who could survive in places where most visitors wouldn't last a single night. Lance Marlowe was 35. He grew up in Flagstaff, right on the edge of Grand Canyon National Park, and since childhood, he had hiked the desert with his father, a geologist. He didn't just know the canyon's terrain, he understood it. Where most visitors saw a chaotic maze of cliffs and cracks, Lance saw a landscape that felt almost like home. During his 10 years as a park ranger, he had taken part in more than 100 search and rescue operations. He pulled people off ledges, led lost groups out of the heat with no water left, and navigated routes that even experienced hikers avoided. His co-workers used to say that if there was one person you simply couldn't lose in the canyon, it was Lance Marlowe. On the morning of October 24th, a troubling call came into the North Rim Ranger Station. The caller was a young woman named Claire Cooper. Her husband, 22-year-old student Adrian Cooper, had left 2 days earlier on a solo hike into a remote area known among park staff as the Shadow Terrace. Tourists almost never went there. No marked trails, narrow ledges, and side canyons that twisted like a labyrinth. Claire said her husband had promised to check in by evening, as he always did, but his phone had been off for more than a day. She didn't sound panicked. Her voice held something worse, a quiet certainty that something bad had happened. Lance reviewed Adrian's planned route. A simple college kid with very little hiking experience had chosen a section usually attempted only by prepared and well-trained hikers. The last entry in the trailhead log confirmed that Adrian had indeed entered the Shadow Terrace. Lance volunteered to head out immediately. He spoke calmly, as if preparing for a routine patrol, but later his co-workers recalled that he seemed strangely uneasy, as if he already sensed this was going to be a difficult one. Lance took standard gear with him: radio, GPS, map, water, first aid kit, and a satellite phone. He drove a service jeep to the edge of the plateau, where he continued on foot. According to protocol, he was supposed to check in every 4 hours. The first several check-ins were normal. Location steady, no signs of the missing hiker yet, but Lance said he was moving toward where Adrian was likely to have camped. The last check-in was unusually short. Lance reported seeing what looked like the remains of an old fire pit, and said he was going to descend into a side canyon, where he thought he might find tracks of the missing student. He said, "I think I'm close." Then the signal cut out. When Lance didn't check in that evening, nobody panicked. Wind, cliffs, and deep canyons often killed radio signals, but by the next morning, his radio was still silent. On the second day after his disappearance, a full search and rescue operation was launched. Several ranger teams combed the area, a helicopter scanned the plateau from above, and later, K-9 teams were brought in. Lance's exact route was only partially known. He was experienced enough to change direction on the fly, choosing safer or faster paths as needed. That made tracking him harder. On the third day of the search, one of the teams found a small campfire. The stones were arranged neatly, and nearby lay a cigarette butt that was later confirmed to be Lance's. It looked like he had stopped for a short rest, but there were no tracks around the site. Not a single boot print, no signs showing where he walked next. The dogs were brought in. They picked up his scent immediately and led the handlers toward a side canyon. But in the middle of a dry wash, something happened that rescuers still talk about. The trail simply stopped, as if the person walking across the rocks had vanished in mid-step. The dogs circled the same spot over and over, whining, returning to the exact point where the scent ended. They refused to go farther. It was as if Lance had disappeared into thin air. The next day, another team spotted pieces of torn fabric hanging on thorny desert shrubs. It was part of Lance's uniform, ripped in long, clean lines, as if the fabric had been pulled hard or cut with a sharp blade, though no knife was found nearby. Farther along a narrow ledge, they saw his boots, a pair of sturdy ranger boots, standing neatly side by side at the edge of a 200-foot drop. No blood, no scuff marks, no struggle. An experienced ranger would never remove his boots on the edge of a cliff. Several days later, the helicopter crew spotted a motionless body deep inside the canyon. It took a full day for ground teams to reach it. It was Lance. His body lay on a rock shelf, partially covered by loose stones. His face was badly damaged, consistent with a fall, but the details around him made investigators question whether this was a simple accident. Lance was partially undressed. His uniform shirt was missing. His pants were pulled down to his thighs, his pockets turned inside out, his belt unbuckled. His jacket lay 2 meters away, folded neatly, almost deliberately. The worst injuries were on his hands. The fingers showed multiple cuts, and several finger segments had been torn or sliced off. Experts couldn't give a clear explanation. Some injuries could have happened during the fall, but others looked like they occurred earlier, as if he had hurt his own fingers while trying to climb or cling to sharp rocks. His arms and legs were covered in scratches, suggesting he had been crawling through thorny brush or scaling a steep wall, but investigators couldn't determine the direction he had come from. Inside his pants pockets, searchers found several crumpled pieces of paper, fragments of sentences, random scribbles, strange lines resembling a rough map or someone's name. The handwriting was shaky, fast, and unlike Lance's normal handwriting. His wife later told investigators, "This isn't him. He always wrote neatly." Experts couldn't determine who wrote the notes. There were no signs of an animal attack, no signs of another person. The official cause of death was listed as fall from height with multiple traumatic injuries. Unofficially, park staff believed Lance had encountered something, or someone, on the shadow terrace. Some thought he had run into a person who didn't want to be found. Others suggested a sudden mental breakdown caused by heat or dehydration, though temperatures during those days were mild, and Lance had more than enough water. A few rangers simply refused to talk about the case. They just avoided the side canyons where the trail abruptly ended. Since then, even the most experienced rangers keep away from the area where Lance Marlowe disappeared. Some admit that at night they've heard faint echoes, like a voice calling from deep within the rock corridors. Others say dogs brought there for training suddenly freeze, stare into an empty drop-off, and quietly whine. People have come up with dozens of theories, but the truth remains as deep and dark as the canyon itself. Whatever happened to Lance Marlowe in October of 2012, it's a reminder that even the most skilled people can vanish in places where, at first glance, there seems to be nothing but rock, wind, and empty space. Tom Garner had worked at Zion National Park for nearly 12 years. At 38, he was known as a measured, observant ranger who preferred order, routine, and predictable work. Unlike backcountry specialists, Tom spent most of his time in one of the busiest areas of the park, the overlook around the historic Watchman Viewpoint, where thousands of visitors passed each day. His duties were simple: monitoring crowds, answering questions, assisting tourists, and keeping watch over the rim during peak hours. It was work that rarely involved danger. On June 14, 2016, conditions around the cliffs were unusual. A thin haze drifted across the eastern ridges, and several visitors mentioned a faint, burnt, metallic smell in the air. Park instruments showed no nearby wildfires, no dust storms, and no atmospheric anomalies. The source of the odor remained unknown. Tom, however, noticed that the smell seemed stronger toward the far eastern section of the overlook, near a rock outcrop where fewer people walked. At approximately 3:40 p.m., he left his standard observation point to investigate the scent and check the railing area. He walked slowly, scanning the ground as he usually did. Many visitors saw him pass by. He did not appear rushed or alarmed. Everything he did looked like a routine inspection. A security camera mounted near the tower captured his movements. The footage shows Tom walking along the overlook path, heading toward a sandstone formation that partially blocks the view of the canyon. He moves behind the formation for less than a second. When the camera view clears the rock again, Tom is no longer present. He does not reappear on any other camera. The location where he vanished is a dead-end zone. It is bordered by a vertical cliff wall with no cracks wide enough for human passage. Directly below is a sheer drop of more than 200 meters. The gravel surface showed no signs of disturbance, no slipping marks, no broken stones, and no indication that someone had fallen. The railing nearby was intact, with no scratches or bent sections. No one heard a scream, a rock slide, or the sound of something hitting the canyon floor. Rangers initiated a search immediately. Within the first hour, they found Tom's identification badge, wedged deep inside a narrow crack in the rock. The crack was too tight for a human hand to reach into, and too deep for something to fall naturally into it from above. Further searches uncovered his radio placed on top of a flat boulder, almost 4 meters high, a location inaccessible without climbing equipment. The ground around the boulder had no disturbance, no footprints, and no scrape marks indicating a climb. As the search radius expanded, more anomalies appeared. A torn piece of Tom's uniform was discovered inside a locked maintenance vent beneath the viewpoint tower. The vent hadn't been opened in years and was secured by rusted bolts. His notebook was later found buried under a thin layer of gravel, along a service path he had not used that day. Its pages were intact, but the cover showed signs of heat exposure, as if it had been briefly subjected to extremely high temperatures. Some nearby stones displayed a similar discoloration, with patches of melted-looking surfaces that investigators couldn't explain. Over the next 2 days, search teams scoured the surrounding cliffs, ledges, and drainage channels. Helicopters scanned the canyon floor with infrared sensors. Nothing suggested a fall. Dogs brought to the site consistently reacted in the same way. When led toward the rock formation where Tom was last seen, they slowed down, stopped abruptly, and refused to approach the final few meters. Handlers reported the same behavior from every dog used during the operation. On the 4th day, a discovery shifted the investigation in an unexpected direction. In an abandoned utility tunnel located more than half a mile from the overlook, an area officially closed since the 1960s, searchers found several of Tom's personal items arranged neatly on the ground. His flashlight, unbroken, his belt, rolled tightly, and one boot, positioned upright as if placed intentionally. The entrance to the tunnel was sealed by a metal gate, still locked. There were no signs of forced entry, and no footprints led to or from the gate. Inside, dust covered every surface except the small space where Tom's items rested, as if they had been placed there shortly before they were found. Tom's body was never recovered. No bones, no clothing remnants beyond those near the overlook in the tunnel, and no traceable evidence indicating where he went after disappearing from camera view. The official report listed the incident as an unresolved disappearance with no confirmed mechanism of death. Unofficially, many rangers admitted that the case felt unlike anything they had encountered. The combination of missing time on camera, inexplicable placement of personal belongings, physical anomalies on nearby rocks, and the tunnel discovery created a sequence of events that did not align with known patterns of accidents, falls, criminal actions, or wildlife encounters. For months afterward, visitors and staff continued reporting faint metallic odors near the same section of the overlook, particularly at sunset. Maintenance workers occasionally noted low-frequency vibrations in the railing at unpredictable intervals. Some rangers claimed they heard sounds rising from the canyon at night, slow, rhythmic pulses that seemed mechanical rather than natural. Tom Garner's disappearance remains one of the most unsettling, unresolved cases in the recorded history of Zion National Park. It occurred not in an isolated wilderness, but in plain sight, under full daylight, within meters of dozens of people. The lack of physical evidence, combined with the presence of objects in impossible locations, continues to fuel speculation among investigators, park staff, and anyone familiar with the case. To this day, no explanation has managed to account for everything found and everything that was never found at all. Owen Hardy was the kind of ranger people remembered. Short, lean, always sunburned, with a thick beard and the calm, quiet manner of someone who spent more time outdoors than anywhere else. He was 31, and unlike the classic hero ranger tourists imagined, Owen wasn't loud or charismatic. He was focused, methodical, even a little strange. He preferred working alone, long patrols, remote areas, and more than anything, the far northern reaches of Redwood National and State Parks, where the old-growth forest breaks into deep ferned canyons and narrow, twisting ravines. He had been a ranger for only 5 years, but he already had a reputation for finding people no one else could. He didn't rely on GPS. He He read soil patterns, broken twigs, moss shadows, the direction of cracks in the damp sandstone. Other rangers joked that, when you walk with Owen, it feels like he's talking to the ground. But a few months before his last patrol, he started acting differently. He told co-workers about strange sounds deep inside Fern Canyon, like someone breathing in the walls of vegetation. He said he sometimes heard footsteps behind him, even when the trail was empty. Most rangers shrugged it off. Fog, isolation, and thousands of solo hours can do that. But one afternoon, Owen said, "Sometimes I think someone already lives in those side ravines. We just never see him." After that, he stopped talking about it completely. On August 15, 1998, Owen received a call-out. He needed to check a dangerous remote section near the James Irvine Trail, one of the most rugged routes in the park's northern backcountry. A man had gone missing, 39-year-old history teacher James Hill, who came to California for a solo vacation. James loved archaeology and wanted to explore an unmarked grove he had read about for years. His last phone call was calm but tired. 5 hours later, his phone went silent. Owen reviewed his route, and one detail bothered him. James had sent his wife a sunset photo of himself. In the background, behind him, was a narrow, shadowed ravine, not part of his planned route. And in the darkness behind him was a blurry figure. It could have been a trick of the light. Or someone else. The image was too distorted to know for sure. Owen started his patrol at 7:40 a.m. The weather was perfect. Cool air, light fog, mild wind. He moved fast. At 11:13 he checked in, saying he had found James's boot prints heading down into an unmarked gully. He added, "I don't like this." He didn't plan to go this way. He was asked to check in every 4 hours. The next transmission was his last. At 2:02 p.m., Owen attempted his scheduled check-in, but the transmission came through broken and incomplete. The signal cut out mid-sentence, as if something interfered with the radio at the exact moment he tried to report his status. After that abrupt interruption, the channel went silent. Multiple attempts to re-establish contact were made over the next several minutes, but no reply ever came through. When he didn't return that evening, search teams were deployed. For 2 days they combed the Irvine Trail region. No sign of James, no sign of Owen. On the third day they found something strange. James Hill's backpack, neatly placed next to a fallen log. Everything was inside. Food, gear, water. A lost hiker would never abandon water. A kilometer farther they found Owen Hardy's windbreaker, damp from fog, but torn in 3 long, perfectly parallel cuts, as if made with a razor-sharp blade. But there was no knife, no blood, no footprints. Nothing disturbed around it. Dogs were brought in. They caught Owen's scent instantly and moved toward a narrow passage between thick walls of ferns. Then suddenly, the dogs stopped. They backed away, whined, and refused to enter the corridor. On the 6th day, searchers found Owen's boots, standing upright, perfectly even. Toes pointed toward a steep ravine drop. The ground around them was untouched. No scuffs, no prints, no dragged soil. They looked like someone had placed them there, not walked in them. 2 days later, they found Owen. His body was deep inside a narrow sandstone crevice, a place no person could simply fall into. He was lying on his side, almost carefully positioned. His face was damaged, consistent with a fall, but nothing else fit a normal fall. Owen was partially undressed. His pants were torn open. 2 finger segments were missing from his hands. His skin was covered in dozens of thin, razor-like cuts, the kind you'd expect from sharp brush or something with claws, but there are no animals in redwood forests that leave marks like that. Inside his pocket, searchers found a scrap of paper, torn from James Hill's notebook. On it, written in shaky, uneven handwriting, were the words, "He didn't go down, he went up." What that meant, nobody knows. James Hill was never found. Not a single piece of clothing. No gear. Nothing. Only his backpack, placed in a spot he should never have reached. Officially, Owen Hardy's death was ruled an accidental fall. Unofficially, the rangers who worked that search don't believe it. Rangers on the Irvine Trail claimed they heard quiet footsteps circling their camp at night, but flashlights revealed no one. Dogs brought to the site in later years always reacted the same way. They froze at that narrow fern passage and refused to continue, tails low, staring into the dark. Some believe James Hill met someone hiding in the side ravines. Others say disappearances in the northern redwood backcountry happen more often than reported, and a few still repeat Owen's old words. Someone lives in those side ravines. We're just not supposed to see him, but no one knows the truth. Redwood National and State Parks aren't just forests. Sometimes they take people quietly, without a trace. And sometimes they leave behind questions no one can answer. Eric Doyle had been a ranger at Grand Canyon National Park for 12 years. He was not a legend of the park, and not the kind of man people wrote about in newspapers, but other rangers respected him. He was quiet, careful, and exceptionally good at noticing details. He knew where a trail had shifted after rain, where a rock layer had become unstable, and where old metal railings could turn into deadly lightning conductors during a storm. On August 24, 2019, Eric was not supposed to be working. It was his day off. He was at his small service cabin on the North Rim when a fast, violent thunderstorm hit the area. Rain came down in sheets. Wind threw sand against the windows. Lightning struck every minute. In this kind of weather, several trails in the park needed to be closed, especially those with old metal chains or handrails. But the closest hazardous zone near Eric's cabin had no remote closing system. Someone had to physically go there and turn tourists back. At 5:42 p.m., dispatch received a call from two hikers. They reported hearing a strange, constant echo from deep inside a narrow side canyon off the East Rim Trail. They said the echo continued even when they were not making any noise. They also reported wet metal chains hanging across the route ahead. The rain was so strong that any lightning strike could have traveled through the metal and hit anyone nearby. There were no active patrol units close to that location. The nearest ranger was almost 40 minutes away. Eric heard the call on his radio. He was not required to respond, but he knew the area well. He knew the old chains, the slick rocks, the narrow canyon walls, and the danger of a lightning strike hitting metal in a confined space. He decided to go anyway. He stepped out into the storm, took only his backpack, first aid kit, radio and body camera, and started moving toward the canyon. At 6:03 p.m., he contacted dispatch and said he would reach the hazard zone before the scheduled patrol. He asked the incoming team to keep moving toward him. The storm was still raging, but Eric made quick progress. He knew every turn of that trail, every crack in the limestone, every place where water pooled after heavy rain. At 6:19 p.m., he arrived at the entrance of the narrow side canyon. The hikers who had called earlier were already gone. Later, they said the thunder and strange echo scared them, so they returned to the parking area, but Eric decided to continue. He wanted to make sure nobody else had entered the canyon. At 6:24 p.m., he switched on his body camera. The recording captured the sound of heavy rain, gravel crunching under his boots, and a long, rolling echo that matched every distant thunderclap. Eric walked deeper into the canyon, shining his flashlight on the wet rock. Then he suddenly stopped. He turned his head toward the canyon wall. On the recording, only rain and wind are audible, but Eric spoke quietly, almost to himself. "This is an echo. Someone is..." The sentence cut off. The camera dropped onto a flat stone. The image tilted sharply. The last visible frame showed Eric's boot stepping toward the edge of a small, slick ledge. Then the picture blurred, fell sideways, and froze. The recording ended. 20 minutes later, the first search team arrived. Eric was nowhere in sight. The body camera lay on a narrow ledge only a little more than a meter wide. Below it was a deep fissure, about 70 meters down. But the ledge showed no sliding marks, no disturbed stones, no indication of a fall. Rescuers focused on the bottom of the canyon. The next morning, once the storm cleared, experienced climbers reached the floor of the ravine. There they found the first piece of evidence, Eric's headlamp. It was lying on a dry section of rock almost 400 meters away from the point where the camera was discovered. It wasn't a straight line. To reach that place, a person would have had to cross multiple natural barriers that required ropes and technical climbing skills. On the second day, searchers found a second item, one of Eric's gloves. It was wedged between two slabs of sandstone. The glove was completely dry, even though the surrounding area was still glistening from the storm, but they did not find Eric. The search operation lasted 6 days. Teams checked every possible area: the canyon floor, adjacent side channels, ledge systems, hidden pockets, dry falls, and small vertical cracks. There was nothing. No clothing, no boots, no radio, no backpack. On the third day, searchers found something that confused everyone. On a tall, vertical sandstone wall, about 30 meters off the ground, were two clear handprints. Not full prints, but the kind left by wet palms pressed into damp rock. Experts said they looked like someone had been on their knees or trying to climb. But the wall had no holds, no access route, no safe way up or down. Only advanced climbers with ropes could reach that area. Eric had no climbing gear with him. Some suggested the prints might belong to another missing person, but after analysis, rangers concluded the size matched someone of Eric's height and build. Identification wasn't possible, but the timing matched the storm. No other trace of him was ever recovered. The official report listed the cause as accidental fall during severe weather conditions. Unofficially, every ranger who worked that search said the same thing. Nothing about the case made sense. The weather was dangerous. The rocks were slick. The canyon was narrow. Everything pointed to an ordinary fall, but the details did not match. A camera with no sign of a fall, a headlamp hundreds of meters away, a dry glove after a storm, handprints on a vertical wall, no clothing, no gear, no remains. Eric Doyle was never found. And today, when storms roll across the North Rim and thunder echoes through the side canyons, rangers say the sound seems to linger a little longer in that specific canyon, as if the echo moves on its own, deeper into the rock corridors, exactly where Eric was last seen walking into the rain.